Good evening, everyone. How are you doing tonight? Steve Stockton with you. Hope you survived Black Friday. We need a day for the paranormal. Maybe this can be Paranormal Saturday. So we got Cyber Monday coming up. How about now, Bomber? Can you hear me? Hey, Jose. Hey, Annie. Glad you made it on time. Good to see you. Guys, let me know in the chat if you can hear me. How about now? Is that better? Same mic, same settings I had last night, but sometimes I don't know what changes, but sometimes it'll be a little low. Anne Celine, good to have you with us. Lady Anne, Caravan, Library of Lore, Gary Manley from England, welcome in. Okay, and they can hear me now. Well, how's everybody doing? Glad to have you here with us. Going to give just a minute to let the crowd come on in. Glad you could join me tonight. I usually don't stream 2 nights in a row, but it just worked out that way. But I've got a really, really good show lined up for you tonight. Paranormal author Varla Ventura is going to be with us. She's written several different books, one of which you can see there in the thumbnail. I've got a copy of it in my hand. Paranormal Parlor, Ghosts, Seances, and Tales of True Hauntings. So fascinating book. I recommend it. Any of her books, actually. But be sure and pick up a copy of it. There is a link to her website in the description. Easy to remember, varlaventura.net. Missy Torres, good to see you. Kiko, hey there. Glad you love the channel. Julie B, well, welcome in. Glad to have you here. Scott, I see you there too. Jeannie, thanks for joining us. Jeannie, if you remember the live stream I did with Seth Breeze from Skinwalker Radio, Jeannie was in the area of Skinwalker Ranch at the time live, and she sent us those pictures that I put on screen. So, Jeannie, welcome in. Glad you could join us. Michael Meadows. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and bring our guest in tonight. Everybody to give a nice campfire welcome for Varla Ventura. Varla, come on in.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
Oh, happy to have you here. Thank you for coming. So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing just fine. I managed to, survive the holidays relatively unscathed. So far, so good.
Good deal. Did you get out and do any fighting on Black Friday?
No, in fact, I sort of made it a buy nothing day, and I felt really good about that.
That's
Just
what I
was
did.
like, I'm
I
a contrarian, you know? It's like, you want me to buy stuff? I'll wait. I'll wait until it's more expensive.
just
See?
for spite.
Just out of spite.
I like that. I love that. But no, I didn't get out. I leave that up to everybody else. I've never been one for Black Friday. I don't like crowds like that, and the whole crush. And if I want a
Oh,
cheap TV, I'll order it off of Amazon.
yeah, I kind of feel, especially of all years, I really want to kind of try and keep as shopping local as I can. But of course, that poses some issues with places being not open. And so I've been talking about it with a couple of friends, and they're like, "Okay, here's what we do: you go in first, and you just kind of go on like a mission. You go in the store and you look around, you take inventory, then you come back out, because you're only supposed to be in there for so long. You come back out, you do your list, and then you go in, the next day and you buy a few. So you kind of it's like, well, this could be
I've
fun.
done that. I'll go in the store and look at something, or maybe try it on or whatever, and then go home and order it online. But I don't even do that anymore. I don't get out. I've been practicing for quarantine my whole existence, basically. So, and you were telling me before the show here that this has been a very good year for you as well. As much as we hate to say that, I was telling you how I know it's been a crap year for most people, but it's been the best year that I've ever had in regards to my books and my writing and the YouTube channels and the podcast and everything. What have you had going on this year?
Well, I mean, there've certainly been, quite a few struggles. I have a son who's of school age, so elementary school. So there's been a lot of an emotional roller coaster with the school and the kids.
Mm.
Um, but and no, not being able to travel. I really love traveling. I love, I love traveling internationally if possible, and frequently go on quote unquote research trips. So, um, But for me, I don't know, maybe it's something about it being such a dark and strange year. I have been very creatively stimulated and have really been more prolific with my writing and some of my creative projects than I have been in previous years, actually. And some of that may well be that without those additional distractions of all of our other duties and traveling around and going places, that many, many evenings have been free to let my dark mind wander. So I don't know. There's something about, I mean, it's been a bit of there's been quite a bit of horror this year and just in general. So I think I've been just tapping into that in a creative way. I've felt that before. I'm frequently more creative in the winter when there's just a lot more introspection and, it gets darker early. As soon as the sun goes down, I'm ready to write. But I don't know. It's been such an odd year, and I think when you're a creative person or a person who thinks differently, you can approach these kind of situations, especially if you consider yourself someone not one of the masses. You can all kind of give a little bit more of an outside perspective and can just really fuel your mind a lot. And I think for people who do things like writing, podcasting, radio shows, I think we both do. We've talked about we did a little bit off here. We both do quite a bit of editing, so I've seen some other people's creative projects as well. And in that regard, I think it's been a very strong year. And I was also saying I can't wait to see what we will be looking at this time next year in terms of what people wrote during quarantine, what people produced, what kind of art comes out of it. It's probably the silver lining of any kind of really dark time in history is the tremendous amount of creativity and expression that comes with that. So that's the silver lining, I suppose.
And that's one of those lemons into lemonade type thing where you can take dark, weird things going on and then channel that into something else. I was mentioning before the show, I saw a trailer for the film Songbird, and it's about a future where all this is amped up even more. I suggest everyone seek out the trailer for Songbird. I'm not sure when it's coming out. I think maybe in December, but it takes quarantine to a whole new level. But I'm the same way. I do my best writing. I'm at my most creative. Anything that I do seems between midnight and about 4 to 5 a.m.
The witching hours.
Yeah, absolutely. The dead of night, which incidentally is a new show that I've got on KPNL. First episode last night. I went on live and rambled for a half an hour after the top of my head, or off the top of my head rather. But that was just me and a microphone, and that's what I like sometimes when there is no distractions, when there's not a video or not music or something going on. It was just me talking. I had a great time, so I'm going to do that some more. But now, you're like me. You're a storyteller, a raconteur, if you will. Tell us about your books. Just pick one and run with it. You've got so many. I don't know. I've got a favorite, but what's your favorite of your books?
Well, I would say, it is actually easier to pick than like picking a favorite child.
I was going to say it's like picking a favorite child.
I just think I'm a stronger writer the more I've written. And so while I think the first couple of books that I did, like the Books of the Bizarre, which are still frequently the most popular ones, I just think I've gotten a lot better at research and kind of the structures of the books and little things like that. So I really like, actually, the Varla Ventura's Paranormal Parlor is the most recent book that I've written. And I really like that one because I think I was more honest and put more of myself and my own experiences in that. And I also talked about some topics that I've always been interested in and was able to explore those in a little more detail that I had kind of dabbled in and out of. So I really like that one. I mean, I love a good book of ghost stories, and I love, as I'm sure you are, this happens to you all the time, but one good ghost story deserves another.
Absolutely.
And so once you write something like that or you share something like that, people always have more to contribute. And And I also really like some of the, like, I sort of call them like magical creature books. So the book I wrote before this was different only in that it's kind of about the fairy kingdom. So that's fairies, pukas, and changelings. And that's about all kinds of like strange creatures that live in the fairy kingdom, that we kind of look at the fairy kingdom as being this place with, these sweet little things that go from flower to flower. And that is not the fairy kingdom that I write about or that I explore. I explore the one that you go into the cave and the next thing you know, two-headed beasties are chasing you out. So,
And we talk a lot about missing persons on here, and that's one thing that's common in a lot of the missing person cases. It's similar to a lot of, particularly the Native American legends of the Fae or the little people, that they lead you into the woods if they don't like you, and you're never seen again.
yes, and it was interesting to me because when I was researching the fairy book, there was I just went a little further than I'd ever gone before with some of these creatures, and found some folklore I had not seen before. And there were quite a few stories that really reminded me, um, for example, that the whole idea of sort of being kidnapped and taken into the fairy kingdom or lured into the fairy kingdom, where you basically then wake up, you think that it's been a few hours, but it's been weeks, you've been missing, your clothes are missing, and you're wandering along some, old logging road or some kind of like, really. And it reminded me a lot of some of the abduction stories, alien abduction stories.
Hmm.
And I think that one of the things that they have in common, and I'm not here to argue that, alien abductions are fairies or fairies are alien abductions. I certainly think there's probably some that could be one or the other. But I think they all really have to do with our relationship with time and what we think of as time, and that idea that you can go into the fairy kingdom and, everything looks really beautiful and you're dancing and you're drinking and you don't realize that everyone's sort of gradually, the party lights are fading and everyone's looking a little haggard. It's like the end of, it's 3 a.m. on New Year's. And then that kind of comes to light, and just losing track of time. It's that classic Rip Van Winkle that you see over and over again in the fairy stories. And the way that they playfully or mischievously or, very deliberately have a completely different, their time is different than how we look at time. It's not like, oh, it's 1 o'clock, oh, it's 2 o'clock. There's this whole other sort of dimension going on with it. And it really messes with people's well-being and their future well-being. And I think you see that also with some of those really intense abduction stories, that they can't ever really look at the world again. And in fact, in a lot of those fairy abduction stories, once that happens, especially if it happened when you were younger and then you are returned for whatever reason, you are actually then you're able, and sometimes you gain the second sight, so you can walk into a market and see who's real and who's not. You can see, it's kind of like that. Do you remember that movie? What was it called? They Live.
Hmm.
And it was it Roddy
Roddy
Piper? Yeah.
Piper, yeah, and
And
had the
he put those
glasses where he
glasses
could,
on, yeah,
yes.
the magic glasses, and see all the messages. And it's almost like, this sort of, once you make it through that experience, you actually gain this ability to see other, other beings kind of hidden in with the regular human world. So it's kind of, there's a lot of interesting stories like that I see that relationship with how we view time and how we survive it.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't think time is linear, necessarily not the way that we observe it. Again, that's just how we observe it. I think there are different streams, and I've heard it explained like that it's like a river, and sometimes it moves faster or slower, just
Mm.
like a river in other places. But yeah, if you look back at a lot of the classic fairy tales, now they've all been Disneyfied and made cute. But if you read some of the original, like the Brothers Grimm's work, there's some really dark, dark stuff in there.
Absolutely. And a lot of the Hans Christian Andersen, a lot of those are very dark. And a couple of my favorite go-tos are that there's this collection of um, Welsh folklore
Oh,
and
wow.
fairy tales. It's called British Goblins. And it was compiled by a man named William Wirt Sykes, who was actually the consulate general for Wales. I believe he was American and he was stationed in Wales. And during the late 1800s, he spent a lot of time, not unlike the Brothers Grimm, or even what William Butler Yeats did in a lot of Ireland, traveling around and collecting stories from people. And he collected, he was very fascinated with the Welsh culture. And he collected a massive volume, everything from funeral rites to superstitions to things you see at the crossroads to all of the different kind of fairy and folk tales, and it's pretty impressive. And what I really like about it is that although the language is very thick, because of the time, because of a lot of things are written in Welsh, which is a form of Gaelic, so they're not translated, but he uses the Welsh words, and so it's you kind of digest it in little bits, and I excerpt from it because it's just straight reading. It's a lot, and it's long,
I
but
love the idea of that. I want his job. I want to travel around and document these things. And that's essentially what I did with Strange Things in the Woods. Those were stories that I heard from family, from friends, from people that I worked with, from anybody that I could get a story out of. And I would love to just travel around and do that. Now, I've been to Wales. It's a very dark, very mysterious place with unpronounceable words. That was the language is a barrier, and I think they did that as a means to not get attacked during the feudal times. Like, let's go to, let's pick another town that's easier to say.
yeah, they'll never figure it out. Well, and you have that the language root of Welsh is the same root as Irish, and these are all the sort of Gaelic languages, but there are varying forms and varying accents, and it's really kind of amazing because, of course, as Scotland, Wales is sort of just considered part of England, even though it's a very unique country with very unique traditions, whereas Ireland has always been, I think, at least from our more Western point of view, viewed as its own kind of country, which it is, but Wales kind of gets sucked into the idea of England, and there's really just a very unique culture there. And well, it's interesting because this guy, I think one thing that you always have to consider when you're looking at like these sort of stories and this folklore is you really have to get good at um, sort of sifting through some of the crap, really. Even in some of the great writers who you can completely respect, you know that they are learned men of a certain class, so they can read and write. So that again already sets them apart from many of the people whose stories they're collecting. They may or may not be of that country or culture. And it was very common for men of the cloth, so reverends and priests, to be the ones collecting a lot of these stories, which means that as a result, they were anglicized. And there was a moral added to it that had to do with God or some kind of shining heaven. And that's not always the case. Now, you see that frequently, even with a lot of indigenous stories, a lot of Native American stories. You see this sort of superimposing of a more, you know, English point of view and this kind of like way to kind of retell these stories. And that doesn't mean you throw, that horrible phrase, the baby out with the bathwater, but you do have to take that into account as you are reading these things. And after a while, even with like, Welsh folklore that's, as thick as molasses, you do start recognizing when there's some pontification and speculation. And you see it especially in some of the collections of folklore about werewolves and some of the Scandinavian tales, because there was a great language barrier and quite a different cultural barrier. So you definitely see that, where I think in Ireland you have more people who were born and raised there gathering those stories, albeit from a little bit of a snobby point of view, quite frankly.
Yeah, excuse me there. My dog Mulder was saying hi. Everybody here knows Mulder. He's a little Chihuahua Corgi mix, and sometimes he gets excited. So apologize for the interruption
You
there.
have a
But
Scully?
I did had a
You
cat
did.
named Scully, but my daughter took her with her for company when she moved out. So
Oh, fair enough. Scully likes to go out on her own. We all know that. That's how the plot went.
yeah. But it's a fascinating place. Really, the whole of the UK and the idea of folk horror that they have there. That I
Oh,
love that whole
I know, me
genre.
too. Me too. It's this wonderful. I mean, I do think we have this more sort of Americanized. You know, you mentioned the Disneyfication. There is certainly this kind of way of viewing, like fairies, like Tinkerbell or something like that. And that's one of the reasons I love traveling, especially to Ireland, is because there's just a bit of a different relationship with it. It's not like put over here on a shelf and something that you tell children at night. You can go and you can explore, and there are, I don't know, like six places that I can think of off the top of my head that claim to be the origin of Halloween.
Hmm.
All of them usually related to some kind of cave that emits strange creatures, at the stroke of midnight. And there's just a different relationship with the places, the old stories. And I mean, I didn't grow up there, and I'm sure that growing up there, you probably saw a lot of waxing and waning of interest in those kinds of things. Like with any culture, you have different things at play at all times. But you certainly can find these really wonderful stories that aren't. I think I really like that they're not dismissed in this way of like, oh, those are just, you know, that's just how it is, and only crazy people believe in those things, right? And it's like, okay, well, this is, my everyone I've met has either, and as soon as they find out you're interested in this type of thing, they've either got like a family banshee or some other kind of ghost, or a story that usually goes back a couple generations about something from the area or something in their family that occurred, like the dog that appears in the sea with giant red glowing eyes, or the well that everybody would gather water from, that they would leave, stones and coins for the fairies, just sort of as part of their cultural history. So it's always a fun place to be.
Yeah, just amazing. Now, as far as getting into the paranormal side of things, I love this book. I noticed Anne Celine in the chat says she has four of your books there. They immediately were taken away by her children, and they even use them to write book reports with. So I think
Oh,
that's awesome.
that is the highest form of flattery, quite frankly. If
And
kids actually like your books, that's
it
insane.
is. And I'm just looking through here at the different chapters, like under paranormal circumstances, have ghosts will travel. That was a good chapter. Ouija, look at that. Supernatural superheroes, belly up to the bar, and then each one of these just has all these incredible little. Like I said, they're short, but they're thorough. You can sit, you can read several in just a few minutes. It's a good book to have with you if you're at an appointment, or if you're waiting for someone, or if you're just like me and just like to sit and read. Uh, I write 4 hours a day and I read 4 hours a day. That's my self-imposed work day. I think in order to be even a good writer, you have to be a great reader. So I read everything I can get my hands on. And this is an amazing, amazing book. Um, Now, when you were putting this together, what kind of, how do I want to say this? Did you set an outline for yourself and say, I want to do it this way and put it in this such an order, or was it more of a how am I going to group these, and then finally it just kind of came together?
So I usually have a vague out, or not, maybe not even vague, a decent outline. And then, 2/3 of the way through the process, I'm completely proven wrong with whatever so
Know the feeling.
things, you know, so one of the things I did, I mean, some of these things fell naturally to categories. So I knew I wanted to have kind of a section on, specific, like haunted hotels, for example. I wanted to profile because that's a lot of my experiences have been in. That sounds horrible, but yeah, in hotels. I mean, I like to stay in haunted places. What can I say? But then another chapter I knew I wanted to cover, and actually my absolute favorite topic, and I really, as I got into it, I realized it probably could be a book in and of itself. It was kind of just talking about the women who ruled the spiritualist movement and what that really meant for the paranormal community, for women, and what sort of things they could do in a time when they didn't have as many options. They could become stage performers and successful mediums and automatic writers and all of these different kind of forms of success that weren't really available to them. It was more like who you married or who you didn't marry. Mm-hmm. So, because we're talking like 1840 to 1920 or so. So that was really fun. But then the other thing that kind of happened was I had several people who over the years I have gotten close to, mostly by being guests on their show. Dave Cruz, who does a show based in where I used to live in California. Jeff Belanger, who many people may have read his books. He has wonderful books on hauntings. I've been we've kind of have a bit of a friendly professional relationship. I would call him a friend. Not sure what he would call me, but
just as long as he doesn't call you late for dinner.
Yeah. So yeah, anyway, I had several people that I just wanted to kind of ask them to share a story with me. And what was really cool is that as they shared these stories, I thought, okay, I'm going to do a whole chapter of my own stories and then a whole chapter of someone else's stories. And then I'm going to do these other topics. That's how I thought it was going to go. And what happened is every single one of those stories fit into a topic that I had kind of already researched. So, for example, I had some stuff about child ghosts, and my friend, and he's a writer, and I think, I'm not sure if his show is still on, but Hunter Shea sent me this story, a wonderful story about he and his wife. His wife was very ill, and they had this child ghost that would visit the house, and he would see this child. He never talked to his wife about it until after she got better, and she then told him how many times she saw this child that would come into their house as if to comfort her. And I happen to I have a chapter in which I kind of it's like the haunted toothbrush, the curious case of the haunted toothbrush. And that is based on a room in a house I used to live in an old attic in San Francisco, on the top of a Victorian. And I lived there for many years. And my nieces and nephew came to stay, and we had this very, funny, but still talked about today experience where this toothbrush kept going off, and we couldn't figure out why it was going off, this, electric toothbrush. And then it never went off when they went home, and it never went off before that or after that. And she replaced the battery, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, we called the curious case of the haunted toothbrush. But that room, when I was pregnant, I actually started to strip, probably not supposed to do this, but I started to strip the walls and found the room that I was going to put the baby in. I found old creepy circus wallpaper underneath. So I think it was a child's room, and it was at the top floor. So it was probably a child's room after it had been converted into flats in the 20s or 30s. I'm not really sure. It looked of that era. And the paranormal activity seemed to increase after that, but also certainly after I brought my baby home. And so here he basically delivers me this story about a child ghost that goes perfectly in this chapter. And then somebody else sends me a story about, actually Jeff sent me a story about going into the haunted, the catacombs in Paris and seeing a man down there. It was really his first profound paranormal experience. And I had just included some things about this other sort of it's an ossuary, so it's in Kutna Hora in the Czech Republic, and it has it's a place where sort of bones aren't, it's next to a cemetery, and it's a church that's essentially made of bones. It's very Baba Yaga, actually. There's a chandelier with every bone in the human body in it, and the skulls are arranged in beautiful patterns on the walls. And I was kind of writing about that, and Jeff had I was talking to him, and he gave me the story, and I was kind of listening to him and writing it down, and that went perfectly in that chapter. So it did form itself, and I also completely used it as an excuse to just like hear these stories from other people. It was really delightful. I chose specifically not to record them or have them write them down and send them to me. I arranged either a one-on-one or a phone call and just listened so that I could experience that like good ghost story. And I took notes, and then I wrote it up and sent it to them and said, did I get this right? And they would, make a couple corrections or say that was, that was what they had said. And it really kind of helped form the structure of the book, because the thing that I felt was really important as the overarching theme was this paranormal parlor, was this the paranormal arts, the art of the seance, the trance, the ghost story, being around that crackling campfire, right? That whole idea. And it really helped me, put me in that frame of mind to hear those stories, get lost in those stories, and then find a magical place for them in the manuscript. And it really fell into place. Once that happened, then I had a solid structure. Then I was probably about, halfway to word count, and had to kind of like figure out what else was going to go in there. But I had I had a structure I knew didn't need to change. Although we did throw out an entire chapter.
Yeah. Ooh, the lost chapter. We'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, and involved a story by Montague Rhodes James, who was a friend of like D.H. Lawrence and stuff, and he wrote all these romance novels, but and poems and things. But he also wrote some several sort of Victorian era horror stories. And in this one, he goes into a dream, and in the dream, he sees a Punch and Judy puppet show in which a murder takes place.
Wow.
And solves it that way. It's quite brutal, terrifying. So yeah, that's a loss that lies on the floor somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, the stuff on the cutting room floor, if people only knew sometimes, like I've had to cut stories and things like that. And I know what you're talking about there, when you have an idea and think, yeah, it's going to be this way. And then once you get down to the brass tacks and actually start writing it, it goes a totally different direction. Especially, I've had that happen in fiction where the characters take on a life of their own. But it's even that way with stories sometimes, and just compiling them. I know I had a book that I'm still working on about the Great Smokies, and Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and I was having trouble trying to figure out. I mean, it's a small area overall, but there's haunted hotels, there's haunted attractions, there's native legends, there's all these different things, and I was trying to think, well, how am I going to divide this up? Do I want to do like the Tennessee stories and the North Carolina stories, because that further complicated things? It straddles the border of two states there. But then finally, when I found that middle ground, I found that sweet spot, and everything just started coming together. So that one in the future.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
But,
so you're still working on that one?
Yeah, about 95% done on that one. Like I said, I had to redo it a couple of times. Just had all the stories, but just couldn't figure out quite how I wanted to put them. And then the stories, the book itself was just kind of like, here, let me show you. And then boom, there it is. But
Yeah,
you
yeah.
mentioned traveling and going to haunted places and haunted hotels and things like that. Now that's one of my favorite things to do. I'm more of a legend tripper than I am a researcher or actually an investigator. Not an investigator, somewhere between a researcher and a legend tripper. But I love to visit these places, even if it was just some place where there was a one-off, where it happened once, like the Flatwoods Monster or the Dover Demon, or a lot of these cryptid stories where it only happened one time or a very short time to just a few people. There's just something about being in that place where you know it happened that makes it seem so much more real, that adds a certain nuance or an ambiance, if you will, that's not there with just reading it, of course. Now, are there favorite places that you've gone to, haunted places, particularly a hotel or a theater? That's one thing I found in my travels, that basically any theater, especially the older ones, have at least one ghost,
Yeah.
and most of the older hotels will have at least one ghost, some many.
I've often joked too, if I ever had like a, if I, just started my own bed and breakfast, I would definitely, start a rumor on the internet that it was haunted.
Now, Anne,
Oh.
that's in the chat here, she and I were just talking about that tonight. There is a resort here in Oregon, and it's purportedly haunted, and we had contacted them about maybe going and doing a live remote there, and they're like, well, we don't really talk about that side of things. It's people come here to relax and enjoy, and I'm like, no, you need to embrace that. There's people that will come just for that. Probably more
Oh,
people
that's
than will come to
interesting.
relax.
I agree. There was I was trying to write something up recently, like an article, and there was the Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania, and I contacted them for like a quote and some images. And it was a Halloween story, and it was like places, it was basically like a virtual, 6 virtual places, haunted houses you can tour from home this Halloween or whatever. And they wanted to talk about their historic program, and they didn't want to talk about the hauntings at all. And I was like, look, you are a rotting prison with a horrible reputation. I didn't say this, but like what are you really want to celebrate your history? And I don't think they were just trying to be educational about it. It's like, you are, like, the history of that place is absolutely horrific, and good on you for owning that, but I wouldn't turn away the paranormal investigators at this point, because you are a crumbling mess. Of course, I didn't say any of those things. I politely thanked them. But one thing that I absolutely love is I love going on any place you go, whether you like ghost stories or not. When you go on those like haunted tours, you always learn so much about history, and you often get access to like these historic homes and things that you might not get to go in otherwise, or museums after dark or things like that. So I have a few favorites. Probably one of the more interesting places that I've done like an overnight. Now, I haven't done a lot of paranormal investigations. I've been around for a few. I am not like, I don't have equipment and stuff like that. I've been invited on things, and I always love to go. But I am more of a, I just have my experiences, or I go with people, and then we inadvertently, things happen. Um, but this one place, and you may have heard of it. It's in California. It's in Ione, which is sort of the southern part of the Sierra foothills,
Mhm.
and it's called Preston Castle, and it's this old, beautiful brownstone that was a boys' reformatory. It first was sort of established, I think it was built in the 1800s, but during the Dust Bowl, during the Depression, it sort of morphed into being more of a place where people who had too many mouths to feed could drop their children off there, boys, only boys. So it kind of been like a juvenile hall, and then it morphed into this like sort of a kind of an orphanage, or a boys home, and you had kids as young as 7
Wow.
and as old as 17. And some of them, crimes could be stealing a loaf of bread or whatever.
Hmm.
But you also did have people who would, they had 5 other kids, and this was a place that they could leave their child and make sure that they had food. So there just a lot of emotion attached to this place. When we pulled up, the sun, so you can go in there and you can go overnight and do sort of like an overnight stay. They said, bring your sleeping bag. It's like, trust me, no one is sleeping. I think 2 people in the group laid down. Everybody else was like, no, we're not going to be sleeping. This place is absolutely, completely and utterly out of a movie set. You drive up to it. It's, we drive up and it's twilight, and literally like bats and owls are circling around the rafters, because at the time the 4th floor was still unrestored, and so you actually had like open pieces and open like turrets and things like that. So it's like, oh my gosh, are we pulling up to Hogwarts right now? And then you get in, and this was a number of years ago when I went, and I'm sure it's more restored now, but you walk in and there's, a few of the places have been restored, but much of it is peeling wallpaper and just, corridors. You go into this one that was the infirmary, and there's, an old abandoned iron bed and a wheelchair in the corner. It's just like, it's right out of a horror movie. And so we spent the whole night there, and I actually went with my my sisters and my mom. My mom's such a good sport, and she just loves this kind of thing. And we kept saying, okay, Ma, if you want to sit down or whatever. And she was like, no. She wanted to just be like right in the middle of everything. And we went they take you on a tour. And what's nice is it's volunteer run, and it's docents. And the docents are the best, because the docents spend a lot of time there. So they love the place, and they spend a lot of time there alone, not just when tours come through, because sometimes they're sitting there just waiting for someone to come up and selling them a ticket. So they tend to be the best people to talk to. Like, always talk to the docents, because these are like the volunteers who spend a lot of, of their own spare time there. And this one woman kind of introduced us to the ghost of this little boy who she had found his grave later. In any case, we go up and down the creaking stairs and around the peeling wallpaper, and my sister had her hair pulled in the infirmary.
Wow.
And I felt a couple like kind of tappings and chills, but mostly I was taking photos, and they just take a ton of photos. And the worst 2 spots were, it gets even like creepier, but there was an empty pool in the basement. And this empty pool, which was, about like maybe the quarter of the size of your average YMCA swimming pool, used to be filled with water that had like bleach in it, and they would dunk the children when they came in to get rid of any kind of like lice or critters or anything on them, and then they would put them in these sort of uniforms. And that was a very emotionally overwhelming place right there. Both my sister and I burst into tears. We took a lot of photos, and later I found very, very pronounced. Like there were orbs all over the place, because it also was very dusty. So some of them I just thought, these are probably just dust balls. But above the swimming pool, there were several that were very brightly colored, and then my sister had a photo, and they were different colors. So that was kind of a really profound part of it. And then there's also like these horrible group showers, where, the kids were all kind of made to shower in a group. And that was another very, very emotionally overwhelming and very charged place. So that was a very profound kind of overnight. And I think just a really interesting place to go and experience. And if you like to take photographs, absolutely incredible place to take photographs. And they're trying to restore it, so the money all goes to like the historical society.
That's awesome.
So that was a really, really unique place. And then my other favorite places, I absolutely love Key West, Florida.
Oh yeah, the end of the world.
Oh my gosh, it's just like there's just so much there.
Sloppy Joe's, Naked Lunch. I could go on and on and on about all the fun things to do in Key West.
You can go look at creepy things in a museum, and then you can go sunbathe. It's
Robert the Doll.
Oh, Robert the Doll. And it was so funny because actually, again, my mom and I went there together, just the 2 of us. And we went on this kind of like mother-daughter like paranormal trip because my mom's really into the occult and paranormal and always has been. And I'm obviously why I am into it myself, because I was sort of raised in this environment where it was encouraged. And anyway, so we went and we did a couple of tours, and then we were hanging out with we went in the thing, and you know the whole story with Robert the Doll. If anybody out there doesn't know about Robert the Doll, he's incredibly creepy. The pictures do him justice. It's basically like this sort of oversized burlap doll, muslin doll with like sort of a slightly askew, rotting vintage face that is in a little sailor uniform, slightly rotting and stained. And there's so many stories associated with him, but when you go and see him in this particular museum where he lives now, you can't take his picture without asking for permission.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you don't ask for permission and you take his picture, you can get cursed. And there's like all these letters on the wall of people apologizing.
I've seen those and photos that they've sent back. I'm sorry I took your picture, Robert.
Yeah, greatly apologizing to this doll. So we asked permission and we took photos, and then I was doing something over in the corner reading like a sign, and I turn around and my mom's having a conversation with Robert, and I'm a little like, what's going on over there? And then that night, it was the next night we went on a pirate cruise or whatever. We came back and we ate some food, and then she got a little of an upset stomach, and she looked at me and she said, "Do you think it was Robert the Doll?" I said,
Well, funny story about that. Ann is talking about it in the chat here. She has a tiny little Robert the Doll that she ordered there from the artist house where he is, the museum there.
Oh, yeah, the Martello. I think that's where he is.
The artist house is where he grew up. I think I may be getting that confused there.
Yes,
but the museum there where he is now, you can order online these little dolls, and Robert comes with this little stuffed animal and everything. Well, Ann had gotten one in the mail, and she and Heather Mosier and I were doing a live stream, recording for the Caravan Library of Lore, and she had the Robert doll on camera, and that's actually the episode I'm editing now. We're calling it the Robert the Doll episode because all these weird things kept happening. Ann's camera kept glitching. We had some unknown number call into the Zoom meeting or Uber or whatever we were using, which supposedly is impossible. We looked it up online, and somebody else had like one of those where you put the number in and other people say, it was a scammer or it was this or that. And somebody had actually said it was some creepy kid named Robert. When I called him back, he just laughed into the phone and hung up on me. So
that's terrifying.
And everything weird that happened that night, and Heather and I were saying, Ann, this is Robert's fault. You didn't ask Robert if you could put him on camera.
Oh, even the replica. You can't even ask the
And they tell you when you buy one of these dolls, all sales are final. You cannot return it.
Oh no! You go chuck it into the river or something. Like
that was what I was saying. That I have a sock monkey that does things of its own accord, and I said, yeah, if I had a Robert the Doll and it misbehaved, Mr. Peepers is the sock monkey's name, and I said, Mr. Peepers would probably strike a match.
Just put it in a box and see what happens.
I've got an old sock monkey that somebody gave me. And it's kind of the same way with Robert. You have to address it a certain way. And I know this sounds ridiculous, but if I don't, it's moved around. I've found things flung off the shelves in the floor. But I have to. He has certain jobs. He holds on to my wallet and a couple of things like that, and I have to tell him he's doing a good job and that I appreciate it. Because if I don't, he'll fling things around, or I'll find him turned a different way. And I live alone except for my dog, and he can't reach the sock monkey, but he doesn't like the sock monkey. He would love to tear it apart.
Oh yeah.
But so I have to keep it up high. But I don't know the history of this sock monkey, but it's got a personality.
This is how those museums end up full of haunted items, because after a while people don't know what to do with them anymore, and they don't want to just chuck them in the river because they're afraid it's just going to show up on their doorstep wet. So they so they mail it to, there's like one in Vegas, and I actually just found one. I didn't realize it opened, I think last year or the year before, and I want to say it's in no, it's in Nebraska. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but if you put in Haunted Items Museum, Nebraska, I'm sure it's the only one. And it's, one of those library of haunted things. Yeah, and I actually so interestingly, the paranormal is a bit fickle, right? You can't, when I see those shows where people are like, summoning the ghosts or whatever, it's just like, come on, it doesn't always work that way. In fact, it never works that way. Most of the time, profound paranormal experiences happen when you least expect them.
Absolutely.
Or are looking for them. And here we were going about, visiting Robert the Doll and going on, this full moon ghost tour and doing this wonderful sail out into the bay and everything. And then we were actually just in the museum, the Shipwreck Museum. If you're familiar at all with Key West or the history of Key West, the shipwrecks were a big thing, and people would scavenge because there's these kind of treacherous rocks all around, and it's so far south in the United States, very, very southern part of Florida, of course. And then you have the dry Tortugas, which are their own kind of island just to south, still considered part of the Keys. And of course, there were a lot of, it's on the way to the Caribbean. There's a lot of pirating and such, but there were a lot of shipwrecks there, and people traditionally would go and they would scavenge things from these shipwrecks, and they would resell them or keep them for their own home. So much so that it actually became a little bit of was looked down upon, but you could find examples of people not causing shipwrecks, but maybe putting the light in the wrong place and sort of leading people astray to create a shipwreck, and then you could go and scavenge the items. And there's a museum there that is just jam-packed from floor to ceiling, and it's like 4 stories high. And it's full of all these items that have been scavenged from shipwrecks, old bottles and ropes and all kinds of things. And I believe they said that there's a ghost there that sets the fire alarm off, and it would frequently set the fire alarm off. And it kind of has like this tower, and someone would be on the 2nd floor, and the fire alarm would be set on the 3rd floor, and the fire department would show up, and the docent would be like, "What? There's nothing going on here." And so I was in that museum with my mom, and I, for all of my love of the paranormal, I can probably count the number of experiences I've had on maybe 2 hands, 1.5 hands, whereas other people have had them, every year of their life. But I've had enough to know what has to really be a believer, but certainly I'm not a psychic medium that has them constantly or anything like that. And I had a real kind of feeling in that museum of, I almost passed out actually, and I was kind of looking at it later thinking, okay, did I drink enough water? You know how you just try and rationalize it away. But it was that sort of feeling, and I don't know if you've ever had this, but that where it just really feels almost like you're standing, but it's like something's sitting on your chest.
Oh, absolutely.
Almost like you're underwater with a great deal of pressure on your head. And I had it so profoundly that, again, I almost fell over. I was holding on to this railing, and I didn't feel like saying anything because I just felt like, I'm just going to like ride this out and make sure that I can stand. And what am I going to say? I'm about to pass out. And then I stepped away from this spot, and it stopped instantly.
Yep, absolutely. I've been in places where I've literally had that hit me and had to hold on to the wall because I would get like swimmy headed or whatever. That's what they call it down south when you get that kind of.
I like that. I'm going to call it swimmy headed from now on. I love that.
That's a southern term there. That's you were mentioning the spiritualism movement. My grandmother on my mother's side, Granny Bessie, she was a self-proclaimed gypsy witch. Really, she was a granny witch is what they call them in Appalachia, but they were a part of that whole spiritualism movement in the turn of the last century. She told fortunes, she read tea leaves and coffee grounds and animal entrails, could do palms or the bumps on your head, which I think is called phrenology. They had seances, table tappings, and they had some amazing stories having, grown up and all that. My mother did. My mother was born in the 1920s. And, talk about having seance at home and tipping the table or tapping the table, asking it questions and things. My mom bought me my first Ouija board. So I come by it honestly. I was 5 years old at the time. But just to
Oh,
hear
you
those
have me beat. I was 7 when I got my first Ouija board.
Yeah, I was 5 when I got my Ouija board, and then it was shortly thereafter, I was about 6, when I had my first paranormal experience. I saw a full body apparition, and it just kind of went from there. It didn't scare me. It just intrigued me. I mean, well, what's that? I know that's not supposed to happen. And boom, there I went. And I don't think it's so much that I chose the paranormal, but the paranormal chose me. I've never lived in a house that didn't have at least some activity. And any place where there is activity, normally go there, I'll experience something or see something or at least feel something.
Yeah, well, we sound very similar in that way because I feel that I also at that point when you might otherwise be afraid, I was just even more intrigued.
Hmm.
I remember doing the Ouija board with my sister. We got it as a Christmas present, you know? It was
Hmm.
like, oh, is that Monopoly under the tree? Oh, no, it's a Ouija board. And doing it with my sister and knowing I wasn't moving it and knowing by the look on her face that she wasn't moving it and really just kind of I asked her about it not long ago and she said, I just remember I knew I wasn't moving it and I really didn't think you were and I didn't want to do it anymore. I never wanted to do it again. And I said, I knew I wasn't moving it, and I knew you weren't moving it because you looked scared,
Hmm.
and I wanted to stop doing it. It's just like that was my gateway drug into the paranormal, 100%. But I had had a few experiences even prior to that, and had I think with my grandparents were actually both deaf, and so they used to do a lot of kind of commonplace paranormal things in the 20s and 30s, just sitting around their table with their friends, trying to project an object into the head, my uncle's head, and he would have to go in the other room and retrieve it. And those kind of like little sort of paranormal, what we call the paranormal parlor. And that is really kind of the foundation of, like, the book specifically talks about the idea of this being a very commonplace thing, that it wasn't an either or. You could absolutely go to a seance on Saturday night and then go to church the next morning.
Hmm.
It wasn't an evil versus good. And the thing that's so interesting about the spiritualist movement is that it was around, right? Like, if people haven't heard what that is, the basic definition of the spiritualist movement is the belief that you can communicate with the dead and that the dead have specific messages that can guide the living and can actually give us, like, messages that we can apply to our lives and our own spiritual practices. And so that's not an entirely new concept, but what was really kind of new with it was the use of sort of a psychic medium and certain tools, and really trying to access the dead to give us guidance at a time when the world was dramatically changing. We were going from horse to horse and buggy to steam train to vehicle. We were going into the realm of electricity and telephones, and all of these things were kind of, we're talking between 1840 and 1930. The world really changed quite dramatically. And it's in particular in the United States, where things were evolving in a very rapid way. And you really had, in addition to that, with the end of the Civil War in 1865, not only did you have Mary Todd Lincoln performing seances in the White House and
Hmm.
making it very commonplace, but you had a nation of people who were in great mourning
Hmm.
with no bodies to bury and no closure because their sons and their loved ones died across the country with no way of saying goodbye. And when you have that many people in that collective mourning, you have this interest in knowing, do they have a message for me?
Mm-hmm.
Are there more sort of like, spirits roaming about? And that really really propelled that spiritualist movement forward. And that's when you got the Fox sisters out on the road, and you got it where it was really, really a movement where you'd have people who were abolitionists and that
Mm-hmm.
were also spiritualists, and they were also suffragists, and they were having these salons and these parlors, and they were talking about esoteric things as they were also talking about the advancement of women's rights. So it's a very interesting time. I mean, I'm not sure if it was really this interesting blend of spirituality and politics that you don't see
Yeah,
quite as
don't
much.
have
So,
that anymore, not like that anyway. And then you
no,
had a
never
resurgence
for
there
worse.
around World War One. That was the first real big world war. And again, people lost family members, sons, brothers, and things,
Yes.
and they were looking for answers. Now, you mentioned Florida. Have you ever been to Casadega?
No.
That is a spiritualism camp. It's still
Oh,
there. It was
yeah.
founded back in, I think, 1875. And again, it was, a place where you could go to seek answers. And there was people there that worked with spirit guides, and they held seances. And it's still there today. They have a Casadega hotel and the Memorial Temple and a healing center. And it's a really strange place. I mean, there's still a lot of, it's kind of different dogma and creeds and things that are taught there now. But next time, if you're headed to Key West, this is in Central Florida, check
Oh,
out
yeah.
Casadega. It's a whole community that was founded on spiritualism, and
Not
it's still
unlike,
there.
it's like the Southern Lilydale.
Yeah.
Lilydale in New York was this kind of spiritualist camp that, is still there. But I think that what happened with those, I mean, that's completely on my bucket list now. Thank you for telling me. But I totally off
Sure.
my radar, and I love going to Florida. I mean, I now live in Minnesota, so you can only imagine how much I love going to Florida during non-COVID or political times. But yeah, I think it's very interesting too, just to kind of think about the idea of those big movements and that massive loss of life. And have been thinking about it a lot this year, Steve. Just
Hmm.
that I wonder if there will be another spike in the interest in.
I think there will, and I think we're kind of already seeing that to a
Yeah.
degree. And I've heard other people that are doing research into cryptids and things like that saying that those things are spiking too. I was on with Lon Strickler on his
Oh,
show,
I love Lon
Arcane.
Strickler.
Yeah,
Yeah.
isn't he great? I
Yeah.
was on with him a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about how all this seems to spike up, like the winged humanoids, the dogmen. It seems like they're coming closer together. Either that, or maybe it's more people noticing them. And even on this channel, we do listener stories where people write in their encounters with cryptids or ghosts or anything of the supernatural or of an occult nature. And we're seeing more and more of this. More people are seeing the Glimmer Man or the shadow people. And again, I wonder if that's because of what's going on, or if everything that's going on has made people more aware of what's on the other side of the veil. Interesting times. That's a
That, or
Chinese
are
blessing
we
and a curse there.
right? Or are we collectively becoming more conscious
Hmm.
somehow in
Could be
this
too.
like
The hive mind is
desperate?
at work there.
I mean, this is like pretty desperate, extreme. Like, if you thought if people thought change was coming in the 60s, they had no idea what 2020 was going to be like. I mean, this is like right in your face, ramming it down your throat kind of change, right? This is not just like, yeah, things are gonna, gradually change. This is very polarizing times, and so maybe out of that comes this kind of new collective consciousness. I mean, a lot of that's the tenets, and the spiritualist movement. really, petered out, but there are people who still practice spiritualism today. And it also was really the foundation for what became the New Age movement, the Age of Aquarius, the astrology and psychic arts of the 1960s that became paperback, cheap paperbacks you could buy anywhere. This whole movement was sort of built on some of the tenets of spiritualism and continues throughout.
Yeah,
So
and
there's definitely
there was a resurgence at that time too in books by like Edgar Casey and people like that.
Yep, absolutely.
And again, those power spots. Have you ever been to Mount Shasta in that area?
Yes,
the
yes.
little town there, Weed, California.
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's so strange. I grew up in. Do you know where Nevada City is?
Mm-hmm.
It's up in the foothills. I grew up in Nevada City as a kid. So, yeah.
That whole area between, say, Susanville and Mount Shasta, that's just a beautiful area there. But there's something there. There's an energy. And all the things that have happened on Mount Shasta, there have been disappearances. And you've got the underground cities and the City of Gold and the Lemurians and different types of New Agers. There's been people encountered the spirit of Saint Germain there on the mountain. And, yeah, they're in the little town Weed. They've got all these New Age centers and healing centers and bookstores and things. It's just a really cool place. And then if you travel on up just over the Oregon border there, you've got the Oregon Vortex in that area there just south of Crater Lake.
Yep, been there. Yeah, definitely stopped at the Vortex.
Going down the other way, there's all kinds of places like that. If you seek them out, Sedona, Arizona's one. Joshua Tree, California, that's one of the strangest places I've ever been. There's some kind of, it's a power spot for a lot of people. It just depends on what you're seeking, I think. And I don't know what it is about the West Coast having more things like that. Superstition Mountains in Arizona is another one. There are places on the East Coast, some of the triangles, the Bennington Triangle and the Burlington Triangle and the Outer Banks area, Cape May, New Jersey. That's one of the most haunted places that I've ever been. Charleston, South Carolina.
Oh,
that's
right,
another
Charleston.
one.
Yeah.
And
what do you think about the whole ley line theory? Because I think that there's something to that idea about these sort of like energy lines. Now, maybe they're fault lines and they're places where the earth is physically shifting, but you frequently have these places of very high spiritual energy crossing, and then a place of worship or practice there, which
spring up,
churches.
And that's like in the UK and in a lot of Europe. There you have those where these sacred sites, where the monoliths and Stonehenge and all that they're along those ley lines. And I would like to see more emphasis on that here, or more study done about that here. A couple weeks ago, I had Nathan Isaac on. He was in season 2 of Hellier, and he has the Pennyroyal podcast, and it's about Somerset, Kentucky, and all the things that are going on there. Well, there's a thing in that area called the Kentucky Anomaly, and it's one of the largest, if not the largest, geomagnetic anomaly in the country, and that's also like the center of where all this stuff is happening. All these weird creatures in the caves, and cult activity, and just all kinds of things. It's just fascinating. And you've also got the largest underground cave systems in the country in that area, Mammoth Cave and all that area. It's just rife with underground tunnels and caves and things. But I'd love to go look into that. And then it's like everything is being drawn there. There's a guy that just opened, well, it's been there a few years now, I think. It's International Museum of the Paranormal. It's right there in Somerset, Kentucky, which is a sleepy little town basically in the middle of nowhere in southeastern Kentucky. But it's got all this weird attraction that's coming somewhere. And now there's people going around, Nathan was telling us about, their painting on buildings and on the roofs of houses and things. This town is a cult. Call the FBI. So there's something weird going on there.
It immediately makes you want to go there, right?
Exactly. I was like, I want to drop everything and go to Somerset. Exactly. And I was like that when I watched Hellier. It's like, oh, I want to go there because my daughter, who's in the chat here, her other grandparents were from, or her grandmother was from that area in southeastern Kentucky, and we used to go up there a lot on the weekends, which she was tiny, and I would get out and explore. And it had a weird feeling to it there, the whole area, the Big South Fork National Park and the surrounding area there in southeastern Kentucky. And I'd go up into Somerset some, and again, there's a lot of little mountain places that just feel off, and a lot of that I think is being an outsider, particularly in the South. That's even from one community in Tennessee to the other, you would feel like, this isn't my place. I don't belong here. If you went a little too far out into Appalachia. So.
Mm-hmm. But even you mentioned the caves, though, and that kind of brings us back to something that we were talking about earlier, and that is that, in like the fairy mythology, the caves are basically the portal into the fairy kingdom. You usually would enter through a rock or a cave of some kind. And it was not unlike, it was considered basically an underworld. So it was a world that was existing at the same time as ours, but that had its own kind of area. And that on certain times of the year, especially people who were witches or kind of had that more shamanistic role, they would go into these caves to commune, to shapeshift, to trance, to kind of communicate with the other world and find guidance from that. And then there were certain times of the year, such as solstices, Samhain or Halloween, when the portals were actually more open and the spirits would kind of come forth. And so anytime I hear about, activity like that, especially happening around a cave or something, it does make you like, okay, so if there's cryptids, like maybe this is the same kind of principle that people hundreds of years ago were seeing and describing, and we've spent all of this time building stuff over the top of it and ignoring what the, original people were saying all along. Like, don't go in the cave, okay? And leave some cake by it.
Yeah, that's another thing that I've read a lot about. The fairy folks is that you have to gift them. They like whiskey and they like tobacco and they like sweets.
Definitely. Yeah, and that's, especially with those sort of more domestic. That's the other thing, is that the fairy kingdom is not just one type of creature, right? You have goblins, and you have like the more domestic fairies, and then you have things that go in the garden and in the fields, and then you have things that live more wildly that aren't they choose when to encounter you. And there's the whole kind of schema of like house elf type things that are there to look after you, but they require a certain degree of appreciation. And so laziness and leaving scraps won't do it. You're really supposed to give them something very particular and very special. I think that's kind of where the tradition of having like garden gnomes and things comes from, is to sort of embody that creature and give it something beautiful so that it kind of protects and guards your crops or your, dahlias or whatever it is that you hold dear.
And even in the Smokies, the Cherokee, they have their legends of the little people, and they say you have to treat them with respect. You don't disrespect them, or you'll be led astray. And they talk about the fairy lights or the fairy lanterns or the spook lights there, that they can guide you off the trail and get you lost, and maybe that accounts for some of the missing persons cases in the Smokies. Or if they like you, they've actually led people out of the woods.
That's right.
Following those fairy lanterns. But
That's
again,
right.
I think you have to be very careful, because sometimes you can make them mad and offend them very easily and not realize it.
Yes. Well, humans have the natural ability to offend without realizing. That's one of our gifts.
But I had an instance one time where I have an area. I'm a cigarette smoker, and I have an area outside where I sit. And I have a little table and a couple of chairs out there. And one day, on top of the table, it's a little tiny thing about a foot square, 3 foot tall. One day on the top of the table, I found 7 kernels of corn right there together. And I thought, now this is weird. I don't understand this. And Cisco Murdoch, she's Native American. She and I co-authored a book together, and I messaged her and I said, "What do you make of this?" And she said, "It's the little people." She said, "Leave them a gift." And I took the caps off of 2 acorns and filled them with tobacco and turned them upside down. And the next day when I came out there, the caps were still there. I picked them up, the tobacco was gone. So
Oh,
who knows?
oh, so they said thank you very much.
Something like the tobacco and left the caps there. So, but that was the only gift I've had recently, and I still have the kernels of corn. I saved them. And then, although somebody cautioned me on that, like, no, you're not supposed to keep a gift from the fairy people. She's like, you need to plant those. So
Oh yeah, plant it. So
I'm
this
going to
spring
let
that'll
them
be
dry
your.
out, and I'm going to plant 7 kernels of corn.
Who knows? Maybe it'll, end up being corn that reaches all the way to the sky.
Or like children of the corn or something. That'll be something that walks behind the rows that I don't want to encounter. But again, that's that principle, sowing and reaping, because when you plant a kernel of corn, you don't get a kernel of corn back, you get a stalk. And on that stalk, there's, maybe half a dozen ears, and each ear has hundreds of kernels of corn. So that was always the cautionary thing. You'll be careful what you sow, because when you reap the harvest, make sure it's something you want to reap when you sow it.
Yeah, yeah. Otherwise, you'll be, trying to give away all of your, giant heirloom tomatoes or something.
Now, my daughter is mentioning the Bell Witch Cave in Adams, Tennessee, here in the chat. Have you ever been there?
Oh, I haven't been there, but I've read about it quite a bit, and I've listened to several podcasts about it. A lot of the, like lore and things like that cover it. So I've never actually been there, but that's another spot that one certainly wonders, what is that really a portal into some other kind of,
There's something there. We went there.
There's something there, right?
Yeah, she was about 10 at the time, I think, and the day that we went, we were the only ones there, and Chris Kirby, the lady that owns it with her husband, she spent a lot of time with us. She took us all through the cave, and then they didn't have the gift shop at that time, but we sat outside at her picnic table, and she brought out these photo albums. And it's another one of those places where people will send back pictures that they took. And she had one picture that she'd taken of her daughter and her daughter's friend. They were just small. And in the picture, the faces look kind of weird, and her daughter looks like she has a snake draped around her neck. And she said, there is no way my daughter will get within 20 feet of a snake. She's certainly not going to sit with one around her neck there. And just picture after picture of all these anomalous things. And it's another place where she gets stuff in the mail, like a little rock or something, and say, I took this from the cave. I'm sorry. My life has been absolute hell. Would you put it back?
Oh, no. Yeah, I'm not, no. Oh, I would probably even ask, permission to take a photo.
But I think you can.
Something always extra scary too about those places that involve a little bit of like, it was like the kid, right? The kid that was sort of tormented by this witch that she lived on the property, and that whole idea that it would just go after the most vulnerable always kind of makes you feel like, this sounds extra scary.
Well, Varla, it's been a pleasure speaking with you tonight. I know I asked you for an hour of your time, and we've ran over that by about 20 minutes almost, I think.
I wasn't even like looking. I was just like, oh.
Yeah, I just happened. I just happened to look at the clock, and I'm like, wow. But before we go, have you got maybe a story out of your book there that you could share with us? Just something quick.
Yeah. Let me think.
That would be awesome.
Particularly, let's try and think of a nice, good, spooky one. All right. So I love to retell this story, and it's a story that was told to me by my dearest friend. I call him Pirate Chris, and he's a wonderful man. We've been friends for many years. He's an archaeologist, so he's a very scientific. He applies the scientific method to everything, but he's also had many, many undeniable, profoundly paranormal experiences, and has since he was a child. Some of them quite terrifying. And this is one of those sort of mysterious ones. Now, anyone who's read, I think I've included 2 or 3 of his stories over the years in my books. There was a wonderful haunted boathouse, because he gets to go on these like he goes to these places, these state parks or these national parks where they're doing like an archaeological survey, and they often stay on site. And so he's been to a lot of very obscure places. But interestingly, the scariest story that he's ever told me took place on his own property, which is a piece of property that is right next to the land that he grew up on, his next to his grandparents' land. And it essentially is this story where he is clearing the brush one night, and he has a little kind of like there's like a well house on the property, and he's put a bed in there, and they're clearing the property with the intention of building a house. And he's there late one night, and he decides to kind of just like, just stay the night there, and he's going to kind of go and relax. And as he settles in, he hears this sound that is unlike anything he's ever heard before or since. It is this extreme moaning sound that is, in fact, so loud that if he's inside the cabin, he comes out, and he hears it, and he can't figure out what it is. And so in his mind, he's thinking he knows all the animals around, and maybe there's like, donkeys mating or something down in the valley. And he's kind of trying to like rationalize all of these things. And as he's trying to rationalize it, the sound stops, and it stops without any reverberation whatsoever. It just ends. And so he thinks, well, that was really weird. Like maybe a friend is pranking me. I don't know. And then the sound starts again, this incredible, horrific moaning, only it's closer and it's louder. And now it's so loud and so close that things on the shelf are actually rattling. So there's no way, whatever this is, the sound is traveling, but it's coming closer. So then it stops. Again, no sound, completely truncated, no reverberation. And then he kind of, he goes inside, sort of closes the door, and it happens again. And this time it comes so close, it's essentially just like surrounding the cabin. And then it sort of carries on, it stops, and that's the end of it. He never, he eventually he goes back outside. It's nighttime then, doesn't see any sound. Sees the neighbor the next day, and the neighbor says they heard a similar sound that ended with a splash into their pond. So he's just has no idea what this is. And of course, he tells me this entire story when I'm along beside the campfire on this property. And guess where I'm sleeping that night? In the cabin. And so what I love about the story is we actually have no idea what it is. It's the area where we both grew up. We've heard a few kind of legends from that area, but nothing that quite matches this. We have a couple of theories, but it has a very kind of Sasquatchy thing. I was also working on the Banshee book at the time. So I have a book about banshees, and I thought, well, was it a banshee somehow? Like, what did we hear something very strange that just, or did we tap into something? So, yeah, just a nice little what on earth could that have been? Terrifying sort of monster in the night that um, sometimes I hope I hear it, but usually at night when I'm there, I really hope I don't. And we're not allowed to talk about it too much around his wife. So whenever I say, "Tell me that story again," he's like, we got to walk away from the house a little bit because she doesn't want it. She's tired of hearing it. It's too scary. Mhm. Yeah, I'd rather know about I'll hear the EVPs in somebody else's house, but I don't need to hear this watching you. I know you're watching me. I don't need confirmation. I don't need a mysterious voice. Yeah, I recently had a woman tell me, "Oh, there's something on your shoulder, on your right shoulder. It's like a succubus from the astral plane." And I was like, "Okay, well that explains why my neck is hurting. I think I might return that." It's like, okay, I didn't need to know that. Oh, absolute pleasure, and thank you so much. It's nice to to hear your stories as well. And I look forward to doing it again. And thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Oh, I thought you meant parting words like, lock your doors. Lock your doors, windows. That tap, tap, tapping very likely is something you don't want to encounter. Yes, you can find me at varlaventura.net, and there's links to my books are all in print. They're any bookstore that you prefer to purchase from. They're available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, IndieBound, local bookstores, and I have a little shop curating on my website as well with random things like bat. I have a hat that says all nighter and it's got a bat on it, and some
That's perfect.
journals and things that match my book covers. So just a few little things we've been playing around with on there. But yeah, it's just my name, varlaventura.net. And yeah, that's how you find me. Find me on Facebook. Those are my two
Yeah,
main things.
a good deal. And unfortunately, I had my mic muted there when I asked you for some parting words, and they're like, "Steve, we can't hear you." I muted my mic to clear my throat, and you could hear me, and they couldn't. But again,
Oh, I
thank
was
you.
just saying, lock your doors, people, just randomly.
Yeah, they heard you. They didn't hear me. They wondered why probably that you were suddenly giving parting words, but they can hear me now. But again, thank you. Yeah, it's live
I
radio.
love one of
Anything can
those.
happen. But again, thank you for being on. I can't recommend your books highly enough. If you stick around while I close up here, and then I'll talk to you for just a moment after I say goodbye, folks. Again, thanks for joining us tonight. This was two in a row. I usually don't do that. It just so happened that way. I'd had Varla scheduled for some time, and then last night's was just kind of a pop-up with Jim and Jade. Do be sure and check out our new podcast. It's if you watch the episode from last night, the live stream with Jim and Jade, the links are in the chat, or I'm sorry, not the chat, but in the description for the podcast and Jim's channel. Got a lot of good things in the works here. Good stuff coming up again. Been a crazy, crazy busy year for me, and it's just getting better and better. I've only got about a month left. But again, Fast Hemi Machinist, sorry you came in late, but you can watch the replay. We always archive these, so you can go back and watch the whole thing, start to finish. But thanks everyone for being here. I appreciate you stopping by and spending some time with me. And whatever it is, wherever you are, have a good evening, a good night, a good morning. I'm Steve Stockton. I love every one of you, and I'll talk to you next time. Good night, everybody.